afternoon. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the webinar presentation this afternoon titled More Than Warp and Weft, the Survival of Diné Textile Arts. My name is Taylor Hasbrook and I'm the Community Outreach Manager here at Crow Canyon. I will be your moderator this afternoon alongside Becky Hammond, American Indian Outreach Manager. I am just going to get us started off with a brief slideshow before we get to the presentation. I would just like to take a brief moment to share our land acknowledgement. The Crow Canyon Archaeological Center acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Diné, and Jicarilla Apache people on whose traditional homeland this institution sits. Our mission-related work would not be possible without Indigenous people in the past, present, and future. We respectfully recognize and honor ancestral and descendant Indigenous communities for their contributions to all humankind. Crow Canyon is grateful to all Indigenous people and supports the preservation and protection of cultural traditions, ancestral connections, and sacred lands. If you have been enjoying our webinar series and you are interested in more engagement opportunities, oh, give me just 1 second. Becky, you said you can't see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yep.
You can or you cannot see mine?
I cannot.
Okay, let me get it reshared here. Thanks for letting me know. Let me know if I'm coming through clear this time. I'm about to reshare.
I could see it. Oh, hi, Joe.
All right, can you guys see it now? I'll take that as a yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. Well,
start your show.
You can see it?
I can see it.
Press start slideshow.
Thank you. Well, if you guys have been enjoying our webinar series and are interested in more engagement opportunities, we encourage you to check out our travel programs. This August 6th through 12th, we are hosting an in-person program titled the Pueblo Weaving Workshop, Field Trip to Bears Ears, and more. During your time on this program, you have the opportunity to learn more about traditional Pueblo weaving techniques alongside textile experts, partake in guided mini adventures to explore Pueblo history and culture, and hear from Indigenous perspectives about ancestral lifeways and cultural connections to Bears Ears National Monument. You get to become a part of the unbroken continuum of weaving traditions from ancient times, from now into the future. Your travel experience will be guided by Austin Kutiamtawa, Christopher Lewis, and our very own Ben Bellarado. To learn more about this program, please visit our website. We also want to take a moment to thank you so much for your continued support. Your generosity makes all of our programs possible. Before we get started, I just wanted to share a brief YouTube video about the aforementioned weaving workshop.
I make different articles of traditional clothing. I also do weaving in diamond twills, diagonal twills, herringbone twills. Most of the time it's for dances or other things. They'll wear the belts. Part of the traditional clothing. As I'm weaving, once I start a belt, I do not know what the design is going to be. I let the belt dictate to me what the design, how the design will come out. The same with these patterns. A lot of my patterns are in my head. Once I start weaving, they just pop out and form themselves.
While I'm sure most of us are familiar with Zoom, I would just like to take a brief moment to cover some basics. Please add all of your questions to the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. If you add your questions to the chat, we may run the risk of losing them. So please just try to add your questions to the Q&A as they arise during the presentation today. If you have any difficulties on Zoom, please head over to our live stream at www.creocanyon.org/Facebook. And lastly, if you have missed any of our past events, you can find them on our YouTube channel, where we will also be posting today's webinar. We host webinars every Thursday, so we want to take a moment to share with you our upcoming events. On Thursday, May 4th, we have a webinar titled Where Are They Now? Crow Canyon's Internship Program, where you will get to hear from 4 of our past interns. The following week, we will have Dr. Kathleen Feindayer discussing NAGPRO compliance. We hope to see you at both of these events. Without further ado, I am happy to pass the microphone along to Becky Hammond, who will be announcing Venancio this afternoon.
Thank you. It's an honor to read Venancio's bio, and so he's such a good guy, and I know you guys will like his talk. So Venancio Aragón is a Diné Textile artist who holds 2 Bachelors of Arts degrees, one in Cultural Anthropology from the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and the other in Native American Studies from Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. Prior to becoming a full-time artist, Venancio worked for the National President in various parks and monuments throughout the Southwest. His interest in archaeology, anthropology, and art has led him on the journey of researching and reviving portions of the Diné weaving repertoire that are in danger of being lost. Venancio was the 2020 Rollin and Mary Ella King Native Artist Fellow at the School for American Research in Santa Fe. His work at SAR centered on documenting and recreating lesser known and uncommon Diné weaving techniques. He lives and works in Farmington, New Mexico, where he continues to educate and promote Diné weaving as a form of decolonial expression. Venancio's textiles were part of the following exhibits: Color Riot, How Color Changed Navajo Textiles, the beauty and the science of color, and tangible and intangible. And so, I know that meeting Venancio up at Mesa Verde, it's just been great, to see him and talk to him, and one day meeting his mother and seeing how, his mother is a weaver as well, and how much she, helped influence him too. So enjoy.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction from Taylor and Becky. It was good to have that, and welcome to everyone viewing online. So I will make one correction. It's the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe. School for American Research was what it used to be called, but it's different nowadays. Okay, so my name is Venancio Aragón, and this presentation will sort of start with more recent history. I know that Crow Canyon Archaeological Center tends to focus on our prehistoric or ancient Pueblo history or indigenous history of the region, but we're looking about 1860s onward. So more than warp and weft, the survival of the Diné textile arts. So what I like to do is interweave sources of data. And I think today when we look at indigenous histories and the ways that colonial institutions and scholarship have really constructed a past for them, a lot of the voice of the peoples and the communities that those data were extracted from are lacking or have been interpreted through a different frame of a different worldview, and the Western worldview versus, the indigenous philosophies from those communities. So when we talk about weaving, there's more than just learning about the structures of the pieces, how the warp and weft were interconnected, the dyes, whether they be natural or synthetic, or the origin of the fibers, or the techniques, how ancient and how traceable they are in the archaeological record. We look more to Diné oral histories, the living record of the people to talk about their own artwork today. And of course, if we combine what earlier research had been done, such as ethnographies, very compelling stories, archaeological materials, and modern textile analysis, we get perhaps a more humanistic and wider view of what this weaving history means to us as Diné people today, and how it has an important role in modern American art. So we begin with this sort of distinction that today most people know about Navajo weaving as rugs, and that really didn't start until around the 1860s. And before this was the Navajo people creating these textiles as utilitarian items, wearing blankets, shawls, dresses, saddle blankets, and equestrian tack such as horse cinches or horse cords and ropes and things like this. So from the humble origins of utilitarian work comes all of this plethora of beautiful design and iconography and techniques that Navajo people are celebrated for today. Just a quick photograph of some of my work there. It's horse cinches that would be used to hook up the saddle to the horse. So our story really begins with the trading post period of the 1860s. So the military conquest of Navajo people happened in the 1860s, which culminated in the Treaty of 1868. And the Navajo people, of course, being released from their internment at the Bosque Redondo, were allowed to go home. And this is where the government issued traders and trading post people were sent as part of the Treaty of 1868. This was sort of Navajo people's first interactions with sort of world of fiat currency and wage labor and the importation of machine-made goods, mill-spun yarns, synthetic dyes, and so on coming from the east with the opening of the Santa Fe Railroad. And this gives an explosion of design and technique to Navajo weavings, but also we see them changing from utilitarian items, such as those blankets that were very highly valued, to things like rug, which really wasn't done before this time. And the trading post people had a big hand in changing of designs and materials, and also marketing Navajo weavings off reservation as rugs. So we see that the ancient weaving tradition of the Southwest, which was carried first by our ancestral Pueblo ancestors, and then shared with some of the Navajo ancestors, evolved through time. And we see that during this time period of the trading posts, that Navajo people were not only negotiating for best prices of their weavings, but also, in a sense, negotiating for agency of design. We see that during the trading post period is where we see the rise of regional typology. So most people today, they talk about Navajo weavings and they say, oh, I have a Granado rug, or I have a Two Great Hills rug, or a crystal, or a storm. And so these names are tied to the communities and the local traders of those communities that those styles were developed in. So some traders encouraged bordered design elements, which was a thing that wasn't done before. And they were, showing weavers Middle Eastern or Eastern European rugs, rugs from other cultures. And they were saying, look, this is the stuff that's sellable. And so if you make stuff like this, we can sell your weavings to the East. And so this is where you see a lot of influences, like Two Great Hills designs have heavily bordered. Some traders preferred certain color arrangements. Some people wanted only, natural palette of wool, minimal dyes. Some traders, preferred to have this beautiful crimson red that we would see like at Hubble Trading Post with Lorenzo Hubble, still active trading post managed by the National Park Service today. But he wanted red, this crimson, beautiful red, and that's how we get the name Ganado Reds. Other traders might have wanted, just natural dyes, and so those might be things like crystal or wide runes pieces. Some traders wanted nothing to do with, Navajo people weaving elements of Persian or Middle Eastern weavings. They wanted to go back in time to the aesthetics of the pre-1860s period. So lots of linear banding and striped pieces. Some traders encouraged only hand spun and vegetable dyed yarns with no borders. And so you see what these tastes of certain trading post people were helped influence the rise of those regional designs, making them distinct. So the trading post period continues even today, although it's a shell of what it once was. Trading posts became the main operations of communities where you would get your mail, where you would, cash a paycheck, engaged in the pawn systems, or you would go to buy basic necessities, canned goods, ready spun yarns, kerosene for your lanterns, and so on. And it was also a place to interact with others of your community. But, over time, Navajo people get access to modern travel, vehicles, and infrastructure begins to be developed. Roads are created and maintained. And so now we see that the local trader lost a lot of power because the weavers and the people that, did business at those trading posts could travel to other places where they would get fair exchange rates or buy things cheaper. And so the trading posts still operate today, but they've sort of changed into these sort of curio shops where a lot of indigenous art is sold to tourists. The tourist economy is a big thing. And it's also where supplies of making these art forms are also sold to, the artisans themselves. So these are just some photos from a few of the local trading posts that are still in operation in my area down here near the Four Corners. And so you'll see there's dyes being sold, ready-made yarns, there's weaving tools as well, and a lot of kitsch. There's some things that are regarded as high art, but there's also a lot of tourist kitsch. And that would be like, you know, uh, those blankets from imported from China or elsewhere in Asia that are, using native symbolism, Navajo symbolism, or Pendleton knockoffs and, being sold for really cheap. Things like that is kitsch. But, there's some beautiful textiles. There's lots of jewelry made by very skilled artisans. And even though we're over here on the New Mexico side, there's a lot of people that are coming in from Zuni or from Hopi, and they're bringing, pottery and kachinas as well. This is Shiprock Trading Post in Farmington, New Mexico. And that's my mother in the photograph, whom I learned my weaving from. She's actually shopping for yarn. So we'll see what the availability of mill-spun yarns does to Navajo weavings a little bit later. So we see that market forces, making sellable things to the trader, oftentimes competed with artistic expression. And this is sort of the beginning of my own journey. And I remember when I was in high school and I was weaving, I use a lot of bright, unusual colors, and I use a lot of non-symmetry in my work that we'll see later. And I took a few of my pieces early on to one of the local traders. This was before I had a website and went to art shows and things like this. And he flat out refused to buy my work, stating that, it wasn't a traditional Navajo design. The color palette was way out there and the ends weren't the same. So I picked up my work and left, but it always stuck with me that, some non-native person, a trading postman, had such power over the things that people were weaving, because for a lot of weavers, that's their economy, their livelihood, and their income. So if they wanted to be a little out of the box and the trading postman wouldn't buy it, well, they were out of a lot of hours of work and labor. And so we start to see that weavers begin producing a lot of, the same similar regional styles that they get comfortable with over time. And this relates to, the material conditions of many weavers living in poverty and, having to sell their work. And if it's a gamble of making something different or new and not being able to sell it, it's, a big part of their livelihood that they miss out on. And we also see that in some instances, weavers' creative individualism may be suppressed by, this idea of only making traditional designs. But I do know as well some traders are very supportive of their local weavers to think out of the box. And so you also see this engagement with, the broader world of art and trying to, make things unique to the person. And, weavers, beyond producing sellable textiles to the trading posts, we see weavers going in their own direction with economic marketing. And we see that today, a large amount of weavings are still produced by weavers for the consumption, by Navajo people. And so this would be things like ceremonies or weaving rug dresses for graduation or as gifts for weddings and so on. And then we also see from the trading post period that in scholarship, we just need more data to sort of help us deconstruct these narratives of traditionalism versus modern and how that's applied to our textiles today. And so when we think of weavings from 100 years ago, we think of them as traditional, but people today are still producing them or reviving older techniques. And then, how do we look to weavings and see their geometric motifs and designs and, go beyond regional typology to say that these are modern pieces? Like, what does that mean, really? And then we also see that over time, how weavers incorporated those designs from other cultures' pieces. They sort of developed beliefs and narratives around how those weavings came to be, how those designs were inherited. And so it's a very interesting, I guess, ethnographic rabbit hole you can go down to learn, from weavers themselves what these designs are and what they mean to each family individually. And also we see that, with the rise of commercial spun yarn, the availability of it, it takes out a huge section of time that would be used for the creation of textiles, which would be the preparation of the materials, the spinning of the fibers. And so with the commercial yarn available, we see that weavers have heavily adopted it readily. And today, spinning is sort of becoming an endangered art form because it takes a lot of time and not a lot of people invest years into studying it. And so most textiles today, if we go to those modern trading posts, you'd be hard pressed to find any that are made from hand spun yarns themselves, but most of them are commercial spun and synthetic dyes. And of course, the importance of the trading of the tourist economy plays heavily into what weavers are creating. And we're also seeing this transition of not only thinking of weavings as, sort of cute crafts and so on, but actually as forms of high art. And so many weavers are beyond the trading posts and are in galleries and have gallery representation, have really built a name for themselves and for the artwork that we've inherited from our ancestors. So, in terms of the collapse of the trading post economy, not having the power that it once had, we see that, we're attempting to revalue the weaver's individualism today, and that, you don't have to produce things that are the same that people regard as only traditional and so on, but you really have, a blank canvas on the loom. And I think that's something that our ancestors always knew, but they didn't always have the economic privilege to be able to do as such. Regaining control of agency of not only yourself, your products, but your narratives. And we'll see this a little later, how a lot of Indigenous artists are, engaging and producing literature, film, social media presences, and so on. And I think what we're seeing is an articulation of a neo-contemporary movement, a movement that weavers produce these pieces that are unclassifiable in the old system of regional typology. And we also see that many weavers themselves, many native artisans in general, are actively promoting and marketing their work and changing up their selling strategies, hitting online platforms. We also see this idea of weaving as cultural productions. So Navajo people, Diné people, rearticulating what the loom means to them and the survival of their art form. And so, when we're fortunate enough to learn those oral histories from our ancestors, our relatives, and our elders, we gain valuable perspectives on this art form and what it really means. And I think for a lot of Diné people, Navajo people, weaving is sort of like this quintessential artistic form that is very Navajo today. And I know that, a lot of our Pueblo relatives are weavers as well, but they're just not as visible in terms of the amount of people, because small communities, not as visible as Navajo weavers are. And, At some point, that branch from Pueblo weaving, when we branched off from it, we took it down, and as those other designs were, adopted and narratives were created around them, so too did, the techniques and technologies of weaving get adopted, and narratives and stories formed around them about their importance through our worldview. And of course, today is the celebration of artistic expression on the loom. And lastly, before I get into my work, we'll look back to look forward in a lot of the works that I do today. So the techniques of my ancestors back in the utilitarian time period were a lot of diversity of twills and double weave and tufting and things like this. And once machine-made blankets and mill-spun yarns come in, and machine-made saddle blankets come in, the utilitarian need for those items drops drastically, and the techniques associated with the production of those utilitarian items also becomes rare. And so a lot of my work is about looking back into the historical record, looking at museum collections and archaeological collections to see the diversity of techniques that existed in the Southwest and how we can preserve those today. So this is a photo of when I was in the Indian Arts Research Center at the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe. This leads up to my work today. This piece titled Mini Prism is sort of representative of the color work that I do. And it was over a long period of time that I developed what I call the expanded rainbow aesthetic. And really, it came from a lot of experimentation. At one point in my weaving life, I was just interested in natural dyes and only hand spun yarns. And I found that, this beautiful palette of natural colors was amazing. And, the connections I had to my elders, the ones that I would ask about the, native plants for dyes, it exposed this beautiful and threatened source of data, human ecological data about local plants and minerals and, just human ecological knowledge. And I learned it as best as I could, but I got bored with the palette. And so from then, I started to experiment with synthetics. And this is when I was in school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I would, use the things that I could find around me. So I would go to the grocery stores and get onion skins or, RIT dye or Kool-Aid. And so I started to expand my color range. And it led me up to the point where I had so many colors that I had to look to a way to synthesize them, put them together. And so I looked to the rainbow, this meteorological phenomenon, very beautiful, that also has a lot of cultural significance to people of the Southwest, being in the desert, and anything associated to rain and water is a very sacred thing. So I looked to the rainbow to order all my colors, and that's how I began to create what I call the expanded rainbow aesthetic. So this piece, polychromatic synthesis, it sort of shows a lot of the various techniques and color combinations available. On the front side is the tufting, and that was something that people used to do on saddle blankets or the weaver's cushion that they would sit on, or bedrolls. It was from a utilitarian need that kind of became rare, and it was revived and preserved, and now we can use it in various pieces like this one. This piece, Prism of Emotions, is part of the permanent collection of the Heard Museum in Phoenix, and it was part of the Color Riot exhibit. So it's where I sort of started going crazy with more and more color. And nowadays, my pieces have about 250 colors in them. And back then, this was about 140, 150. I also like experimenting with non-symmetry. And so going back to my youth, when I took one of my pieces to that trader, and he wanted something that was a mirror image that's very classic of Navajo weaving. But I wasn't making stuff like that, and I still rarely do these days. And so it's sort of just playing around with, the notions of what is a Navajo weaving supposed to look like. And I just, challenge those normative frameworks in my own way through my art. This one is a saddle blanket. It's actually made to be used on a horse, but the collector of mine that bought it has it displayed, and it's been in a few exhibits as well. So it's titled Polychromatic Saddle Blanket, and it was actually the winner of Best of Textiles at the Heard Museum in, I think, a few years back. I can't remember. But it's an interesting piece where I thought I was being unique and new, looking forward, because I haven't seen any tufted pieces where somebody would take the locks of the sheep or the goat that they were using and to actually dye them beforehand. Usually tufting pieces were just all white or whatever lock color the sheep had. But when I was at the School for Advanced Research, there was only 2 of these tufting pieces in the collections, and one of them was really amazing because it had beautiful red and lime green synthetic dyed tufts on it. So it was a humbling thing to think that I, as a native artist today, uh, was experimenting and being radical and out of the box. But I came to realize that ancestors of mine had done it before me, and that was very humbling. This is another of the rare techniques that we see almost disappeared after 1860s. And so this is a wedge weave piece. And wedge weaving is different because the warp or weft is not inserted at a flat line, but it's woven diagonal. And that's what gives the salvage, the edge of the weaving, this sort of wavy, unique effect. It's also known as a scalloped or pulled warp technique, but today it's most commonly known as wedge weave. And it flourished from about, I don't know, 1860 or 1870 to 1890. And it just drops off the radar. Some of the most amazing wearing blankets from that time period are woven in wedge weave. We don't see them much after that. And textile scholars today think that it was probably a large influence from the trading postmen who wanted, weavings that were laying flat, that were nice and rectangular or square. And wedge weaving sort of has a little dimensionality to it. It doesn't lay perfectly flat. It can, but usually they don't. And so that, we believe, is why wedge weaving was discouraged and sort of fell off the radar for a century or two, until a century or so, until Navajo people started a revival period of it. And so this is my modern rendition of a wedge weave. I titled it Polychromatic Refraction. So another non-symmetry piece is Rainbow Interrupted. And this one was actually one of the featured pieces in First American Art Magazine, I think the winter issue maybe. But yeah, it's an interesting piece using lots of color and sort of borrowing some of the designs from my family. The serrated edges, most commonly seen in eye dazzlers, which is what my mother weaves a lot of. But incorporating my expanded rainbow aesthetic color palette into it. This one, Repeating Rainbows, is playing around with the squares. And so where I'm from, the people that I grew up weaving around, my family and my extended relatives, none of them really wove squares much. It was more of the diamonds and diagonal things like that. And so I'm not from the background of being like a Two Gray Hills weaver, where people are really amazing at weaving square shapes. And so this is me playing around with the technique, but using, again, sort of this non-symmetry and my expanded rainbow aesthetic. This is a cool one, Acid Rain. I titled it because on the back of this piece, the tufts show irregularly, so they look like little dots, and they're all in different colors, so it looks like, this kind of crazy rainfall happening. The rainbow corn pieces that I do today are sort of a tribute to pictorial weavings of older weavers. And I think, weavers are amazing because they were at least pictorial forms. The weavers are sort of depicting what's important in their life at that moment. The Heard Museum had a great exhibit. It was Navajo ceremonial weavings from the Rebecca and Jean-Paul Villette collection, and it was called Towards the Morning Sun, that I contributed an essay for. And it was centering on this idea that weavers were, producing these imageries. And the questions that were raised with this exhibit was, did my ancestors know that they were creating references through their pictorial weavings of their culture at that time for not only their own descendants later on, but for the rest of the world? And so we don't really see pictorial weavings with corn being depicted heavily these days. So I wanted to revisit the concept. Another thing we see is that twill weavings, um, because of the decline of utilitarianism, became very rare. And so this is the first of many series of twills that I've done. But this one is a broken diamond twill. In Navajo, the name for it is often referred to as the horn-toed twill because, the design kind of looks like little horn toads going back and forth. But a very interesting piece and kind of rare these days, but nobody showed me how to do this one. So I was looking through photos one day and I saw a historic photo. And I also saw, just the top, like here on the loom behind me, just one of the heddles, the stick heddles. And I could see, just part of a counting sequence. And from that, I was able to reverse engineer the other three heddles and create this piece. This is Navajo Stars. I called it that. It's a little tongue in cheek because, at Mesa Verde National Park, there's a site in Wetherell Mesa called Step House, and there's pictographs on the alcove rooftop. And, there are these black crosses that whoever, I don't know, maybe Gustav Nordenskjold or the Wetherells or whoever named Navajo Stars without any sort of ethnographic data or, knowledge to back it up. We just called it Navajo Stars, and so that name stuck. But I always like those pictographs, and so I wove this one, thinking about my time spent around those places. Another piece painted rainbow, playing around with the technique. This is something that you would see in, raised outline pieces, but it's a little difficult to describe it unless you're a weaver. But I used broken sections of weft rather than doing like a tapestry technique. Rain and Rainbows. This is a hybrid of the diamond twill, very ancient. You see this on a lot of ancestral Pueblo weavings of fragments that we have, used heavily by Navajo people for saddle blankets. And then this one, the diamond twill is there, but also the two-face. So the front and back are different designs. And then, weavers today, we interact with a broader world and discourse with our art. And so Rainbow Lightning was a piece that I wove for Pride Month last year. And the lightning is a symbol for us, protection. And the rainbow background is sort of, broken up by this lightning. And so it wasn't intended to be a pride piece, but it was, I posted it on my Instagram and it had such great reception by people from the LGBTQ plus community that, it became very celebrated, although intentional, but very cool and very appreciated. And this one is the 6 twill piece. So I did 6 different twill variations in one. This is on the loom, but this is to show you at the School for Advanced Research, there was one quill that I identified that was not documented. And in the textile review catalog, it said that it was needing 21 or 22 heddles to create. And heddles are those sticks with the strings wrapped around them. So this technique is only 4. And so you can imagine a 21 or 22 heddle piece, which very phenomenal and amazing. But if you want to learn about that piece, you can go to YouTube and type in my name and School for Advanced Research to see my research while I did my fellowship. So yeah, thank you very much. And that leads to, I guess, to the question and answer section. Let me stop sharing here and get live with other people. Thank you everyone for tuning in. If you have questions, I guess, put them in the chat. Is that right, Taylor? Or Rebecca?
That is
Yeah,
correct.
that's-
Thank you so much.
Well, Venancio, just like looking at your stuff, I was like, oh, I love that one. That one's my favorite. And then you'd show something else. I'm like, oh, I love that one too. So, the horn coats really kind of spoke to me too. So I thought that was actually really cool. I mean, just your work and, just like, I think we all think the same as artists when we are looking at something. You're like, I want to make something sort of traditional, but really different.
Yeah.
And that's something that you see in your work, and all the rainbow stuff, and bringing back some of the old techniques like the horn-toed one, and yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool because we don't really get that sort of narrative from weavings. We see them as objects disassociated from the makers. But I think weaving are these great vessel for Navajo people to have this source of data. Like weavers themselves, our elders are repositories of so much cultural knowledge, ecological knowledge, animal husbandry. And when you're lucky enough to hear those histories and stories from them, you really have to appreciate it as they apply to weaving. And like every single part of weaving, the loom, the history, the creation story behind it, its metaphysical effects, all of that is so part of our Navajo oral histories. It's inseparable. And the philosophies of how to be a Navajo people are, superimposed within weaving itself, which I think is incredible. But yeah, through our artwork is definitely a lot of fun to play around with those old techniques.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We just want to ask you a couple of questions that are coming in. We've got a variety of different questions based off of your personal experiences and your presentation today. So just to get us started, do you have a guide that you typically weave from, or do you kind of just design everything as you go?
Yeah, I think I'm like a lot of other of my people that weave, and you set up the loom and then you just go. Unless I'm doing a technique that I don't have memorized, you have to know the counting sequence. Then I look to my reference book that I record things in. But other than that, yeah, you set up a loom and you just go. And I think the creation is the manifestation of your thoughts on the loom. That's our Navajo belief about how you should weave. No cartoon, no drawing beforehand. Some people do, but most people don't, and I don't either.
And kind of playing into that, what are the dimensions of most of the pieces that you weave typically?
They all range from just a few feet to, large full-size blankets that sometimes I do, but takes a lot of months of work.
And I'll give one more before I let Becky jump in. But how long does it typically take you from conception to finish for most of the pieces that you weave?
Yeah, just like a lot of other artists, we're usually not punching the clock and able to give good time frames. So it all depends on the size, the preparation of materials, the complexity of design. But some of the pieces like the one behind me, I could do in 2 weeks, and that's working every day in my studio for 7, 8 hours. But it ranges. There's not any simple answer for that question.
That's true. All right. So, do you have a website?
Yes, I do. It's my name, venancioaragon.com, and it's on the platform of Artspan. So look me up. And I'm also on Instagram at Aragon Textiles.
And just to
Right.
follow up with that, if you've registered for this event, we will be sharing his email or his website after the webinar today, so you can directly link out to that.
I see one question in the webinar chat. It says, how old is the oldest pattern you have identified? And I think that's it's a difficult question to answer, because if we look to the archaeological record, we see a variety of techniques. So there's plain weave and plenty of twills. And to say which twill came first or which plain weave technique came first is, I think, something that's very debatable. And weavings being perishable material that don't preserve readily, that's not helpful for answering that question. So I don't know. I mean, I think plain weave is the basic structure of interlocking warp and weft. And so it doesn't sound glamorous. It doesn't sound, like some unique or interesting twill, but I think plain weave might be the oldest technique we identify in weaving.
Right. And what materials are used in modern commercial yarns?
So most weaving or most material commercially spun yarns that Navajo people use today would be from the Brown Sheep Company, and that's based in Nebraska, and it's an American company. And their wool is merino mixed with mohair, and it's American sourced wool. Mohair is goat hair. So yeah, some things like that. Other people use, there's other companies that produce wool today, but that's about it for those. So yeah, I use that a lot. I use also a lot of yarns that I can get from other sources. So I might use, Noro yarn that's from Japan, or I love different European breeds of sheep. So sometimes you'll find me on Etsy, purchasing some, rare and endangered breed of sheep fleece, which I really love anyway.
Nice. And are there more Diné men who are weaving today?
I think certainly there are, at least we're more visible. And I did a whole section of this on another talk, but it's sort of this as we focused on today, this reclaiming of Diné narratives about weaving itself. And I think that Western ethnographers and anthropologists came into Navajo communities with already a Western worldview about division of labor by gender and you know um, you know subjectivities of what's appropriate gender roles for male and female people. But if we look to Navajo history, we know that some of the most notable weavers that we have today were men, and it's something that I think if we look to the creation story, when two of our deities, Spider Woman and Spider Man, had their hand in weaving, it wasn't something so strange. But somehow in the interpretation of Navajo communities, it became this feminine occupation. But there was always men practicing it. Just like in a lot of our Pueblo neighbor communities, it's a great diversity of who's doing what.
I feel like you basically answered this with your last answer, but were there more original Diné men or women that did this kind of work, and has it transitioned to more of a women's role, or was it always kind of diverse in which gender was partaking in weaving?
Yeah, that again is something that perhaps is like, lost to time because we can't say for each century what the patterns were. And we know that, when Navajo people start engaging in wage labor, men were the ones that were leaving the reservation or traveling to border towns and oftentimes leaving, their wives and their children at home where weaving could be readily practiced by females. So yeah, it's impossible to say. I think if we go back far enough in time, without looking at the economic constraints or material conditions of that time period, to say generally who is doing it more. It's impossible to say.
Absolutely. Well, I've got a question that's coming into us from Facebook, and I will do my best to ask this question as nicely as possible. It's kind of a multi-dimensional question. There's about 3 questions in one here.
All right, cool.
So are these pieces of art fundamentally representing the light within a rainbow? And do you consider them similar to like the light that are represented in more Anglo culture in Gothic cathedrals or like in Byzantine icons? So when you're creating these rainbow weavings, do you relate it to those same like godlike symbols, or is it something that's uniquely your own?
So um if we look at Navajo culture here in the Southwest, rainbows are an important thing to a lot of desert people. And so we are very visible here to see them, during the late summer monsoons. And so that spectrum of light, of how light is bent with water, for me, that's the science part of it, knowing how a rainbow is created. It's the interaction of light and water. And then looking at my old culture and saying, that rainbows are these important things because they signal, the arrival of rain or the presence of moisture. And also in our creation story there, where the hero twins traveled to, visit their father. And so they're part of the hero's journey of the hero twins as well. And so, yeah, I don't really associate my work like that to, like stained glass Gothic cathedral art or whatever. But I look at it as an indigenous person from the Southwest who's also a gardener and knowing the, cultural importance of water to us desert people. And so, my work, a lot of the pieces and the titles of them are associated to meteorological phenomena because I think as desert people, as desert farmers, we're always concerned with water and rain. It's just a fundamental part of our desert cultures here. And I think if you look at like a lot of Pueblo artwork too, there's rainbows everywhere. And a lot of our sand paintings our healing ceremonies have rainbows on them. And they're usually, short little sequences of color, but they're also protection symbols as well.
Thank you so much for providing additional clarification on that.
I hope that helped.
No, that was super helpful. Thank you so much. I know it was a very multifaceted question, so thank you so much for answering each part of it. I'm going to read this full question aloud to you. It says, "This was a great presentation of your beautiful work. The weaving with corn plants is very cool. The horned toad is great too. Do you make weavings with other animals and plants as well?"
Not really. I'm not really a pictorial weaver. I play around a lot with geometry and sort of, tricks of the eye with geometry. But I did in the past do some pictorial work, and I was weaving, it was sort of my political period, which I'm getting back into. And I was weaving power plants on pictorial imagery. And, for me, it was, looking at where I'm from near Farmington, my community. We're situated near two of the country's worst coal-fired power plants. It was the San Juan and the other generating station. And that was on our skyline, and so I think a lot of weavers were into, doing hogans and sheep and tractors and so on because it was evoking this rustic bucolic imagery of Navajo land. But that wasn't what I was seeing. And so, I did a few things like that, but yeah, I don't do too much pictorial these days, but I'm slowly going back into it a little bit, playing around.
Thank you.
All right. So with the trading post system following out of premise, what are some of the main avenues you see Navajo weavers taking to sell and share their pieces with the world?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the trading post collapsed in terms of its total power, but it's still a very big part of the people's economy today. So a lot of elderly people, elderly weavers that you really aren't that tech savvy, are still tied to many trading posts. So I would say that's the main dominant form and outlet for weavers to sell their work. But what we see today is a variety of engagements with online platforms. I know there's some weavers that have a presence online and on social media. And so people also travel to juried art shows like the Santa Fe Indian Market or the Herd Museum or the Autry Market in LA, which I do a lot myself. And I think it's just about education and helping our elders learn those systems today. Like I know a lot of old people that don't have a PayPal account or can't accept Venmo. So there's sort of this digital divide in technology and access to it that's hindering a lot of people from participating in those systems of exchange. But I see a lot of investment with younger people trying to eliminate the sort of middleman that the trading post is.
I just want to piggyback off that. We had another question that says, "How has the internet impacted selling and making pieces?" So you're seeing more people kind of pivot to that, and what channels are you typically seeing them pivot towards?
Yeah, and during the start of the pandemic, the Santa Fe Indian Market worked with a lot of its artists to develop an online platform and do classes to help them make websites, which I didn't have any online presence before the pandemic, but I was sort of thrust into this world and had to adapt and learn quickly. But I think it's a valuable tool. It just opens up, it's like everything else. It opens up a whole new world for you. And a lot of my pieces that I've sold on my website, they travel to some really strange places I would never see myself, selling at, so I have work all over the place, and it's because of the internet.
Wow, that's a great question. And it says, how do the elders react to your work?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit. Was it how the elders react to my work? Is that the question?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think in general, there's sort of this celebration of creativity today. And I know that some other weavers are like, thinking about their work and talking to elders, and you have to be very formulaic with some of them. Like there's these certain things you have to do, and others, they have that belief that we get from the creation story that weaving is this outlet for your creativity. And so whatever you weave is just a manifestation of your thinking. And I think most elders are very supportive of my work. And a lot of the older ladies, they're most curious about the colors that I'm able to get from my dye pot. And so they ask me, they're like, Shasha, how did you get this color? Or what about this color? And so there's a lot of curiosity, I think, from our elders about my work today.
I've got a couple of questions pertaining to dyes here. So, is there a color that is the most difficult to achieve through natural dyes?
Yeah, that would be red. And Navajo people here in the Southwest, they were doing that by means of cochineal, which is an insect dye that was being brought up by the Spanish on trade routes. And so that was, something that was very powerful and widely used and natural. And, there's a whole history of cochineal dye. There's a book you can read called The Perfect Red about how empires and fortunes were created off of this insect dye native to the Americas. Yeah, red is definitely the most difficult to achieve in nature. And then beautiful blues and things like that, you can get from plants. And it was indigo, once again, being brought up by the Spanish that Navajo people were using to get beautiful blue. But green, true green is a very hard color. And, usually you can use indigo and then over dye something that you dyed yellow. So the combination of those will get you a true green, which is kind of cool.
Wonderful. And going a little bit deeper into that, what natural color from plants do you like the best?
Well, natural plants usually give you a lot of yellows where I'm from. That's just the type of plants we have. But indigo from plants and those beautiful blue tones, I think that's my favorite.
And is your wool primarily dyed with any synthetic dyes, or are you primarily using natural dyes for your weavings?
Yeah, so I used to only do natural dyes and now I mix them with anything I can get my hands on. So I refer to myself as a collector of colors and having 250 different yarns dyed is quite a task, but it's as many different dyes as I can get a hold of, synthetic or natural. I sort of don't limit myself in that frame anymore.
Wonderful, thank you. And are there any pieces you feel your ancestors have especially guided or inspired you through?
I don't know about any pieces in particular. I think it's just the practice of it. It connects you to something that people were doing a long time ago, in ancient human history. I mean, the spinning of wool, I think, is important to remember because not a lot of weavers do that today. And, the spindle, the Navajo hip spindle is, an ancient piece of indigenous technology from the Southwest. So our Pueblo neighbors and weavers use the same type of spindle as well. And it's found in the archaeological record. And so that simple act of twisting fibers together, I think, is one of our oldest human technologies, something perhaps a universal language. And I feel more, connected to sort of a human past by doing that than, any particular design that I might make.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, I guess one common theme of questions that we have coming in is so many people love your artwork. If you had the opportunity to review the chat or on Facebook, so many people are interested in the weavings that you're created. If people are interested in purchasing or getting any custom pieces done from you, what would be the best way to engage with you in that manner?
Oh, well, you're always free to reach out to me on Instagram or my website. There's links to email me or, message me. That'd be the best way. Yeah, but right now I'm, a little bit busy. I'm preparing for the Santa Fe Indian Market in August. I'm teaching spinning classes at the Flagstaff Fiber Art Festival. So if you're going to be at that festival, you can come visit me as well. And I'm preparing a few pieces for an exhibit in Chautauqua, New York in June. So I've got a lot on my plate, but I take the occasional commission if I can squeeze it in.
Well, I'm sure you'll see some of our viewers at some of those events. We've got a lot of people really excited about your artwork here. So thank you so much, Venancio, for taking the time to do this for us today. We're right at 5 p.m. and I want to be respectful of your time this afternoon. But we really appreciate you sharing this with our audience. So thank you so much. And we really hope to get to work with you again in the future.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for viewing.
Awesome. We hope to see you soon. Thanks, everyone.